No.
So, Alex, we are back.
We are. Back from where? I've been to Mars. Where have you been?
You've been to Mars? That is impressive. Was that like you for your birthday? Because you had a birthday a day ago or a week ago from the perspective of...
Depending on when
I'm consistent
relative time is.
About getting these things up on time. But yes, if you're listening to this the day the podcast comes out, it will have been a week ago, you have aged an entire year.
I mean, conceivably, people could be listening to this well after we're dead. So I may have aged hundreds of years, but the listener's perspective. But yes, from the last podcast, I have aged an entire year in just a week.
If I live to be 500, I plan on living forever.
Perhaps the listener is like 500 years in the future, but we've died. Like, not that we live to be 100, but like we only lived to be 80 or whatever, and then we died. And now they're 500 years in the future, and they stumbled across like an old iTunes backup from the early 2000s and listening to it for some reason. I don't know why. But hello, people from the year 2500. How are you doing?
2,500. What is that like, Alex? 2,500.
There's less grass.
All right.
That's about all I predict, is that there'll be less grass in the year 2500.
That's brilliant. I love it.
I'm glad we come to a consensus on what the year 2500 looks like.
There's a thing about our show notes, and that is that because we never attribute who put things in our show notes, I find myself going, like, I'll try and review these things, like, before we go to record, and then I'll realize, like, there are some of them where I'm like, I've vaguely looked at that, but I'm not gonna look at it in depth, because that's something that Alex is gonna talk about, and then there are a couple of these where I'm like, I don't remember, like, am I supposed to know what this is? It's like, we've got a story here that NASA is using Unreal Engine to make a virtual reality Mars. I think that was my story, but I don't remember. Okay.
I didn't put it in there. I can tell you that for certain. I did read it. I had read about it, but
okay, well, since you've read it, you can...
Wait, you haven't read it?
I skimmed it, and I was like, oh, this would be cool to talk on the podcast. This is what I do, is I set up a list of things. Fair. This is... I'm interested in the idea that just we don't even have to go to Mars anymore, Alex. We found a very cheaper way to go to Mars.
I mean, A, Mars is lovely this time of year, and B, I mean, there's only so much, like, being in a holodeck can teach us. Like, you can't really do science that way, right? Like, it's just, might as well do science with robots instead of, like, virtually transplanting yourself there.
Right.
So we still need to, like, send scientists and geologists and such to Mars, or at least be able to bring enough Mars, like, physically back for them to study. But yeah, for us regular folks who want to go to Mars without spending billions and billions and billions of dollars.
I'd be fine spending billions and billions and billions of dollars. The getting of the billions and billions of dollars would be the less pleasant part, but I'd be perfectly happy to spend that to go to Mars.
Okay, well, I mean, for the regular people who don't have a trillion, disposable income dollars lying around, NASA wants to use, like, cameras and take 3D video and pictures of Mars and construct a VR landscape that you could then visit through your Oculus Rift. They're working with some game developers from the same company that made BioShock Infinite, which is actually a fairly stunning looking game. So I'm fairly excited that, maybe this will actually look really good.
You totally read this a lot more deeply than I did. So I was like, oh, it's the Unreal guys. Okay, cool. Nice. VR, Unreal, and Mars. That was what I got out of there.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Unreal Engine. It was, I think, Imitation Games. I don't know. They're the guys who did the BioShock Infinite game, which I think that's probably their most well-known title nowadays. It's not the studio. It's just some people from that studio, because I think the studio may have gone defunct. I don't remember.
Oh, wow. That's anyway. That's depressing. You release BioShock Infinite, and then you go bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean... The games industry is tough, man. Games industry is tough.
I don't. It seems like a really easy field to get into and succeed in from the outside. Seems like a cakewalk, man. If anything,
really?
we need to be paying indie devs far less because it's just such a fun. It's just a fun jaunt of. Like you don't even have to get a real job. You just play games all day, and then we pay you money to do it. I mean, just gaming seems so freaking easy. Overvalued.
I disagree, but I want to use this to go on a little tangent. I have been playing The Witness lately.
I was hoping you'd tangent on this because I was going to ask you about it if you didn't bring it up.
The Witness is a indie game, for those of you who don't know, that's all just like these maze puzzles. So there's like 700 of these little like trace a line through a maze.
Did you say and then maze puzzles, or did you say amaze puzzles? Because that seems brilliant. And I'm gonna start saying amaze puzzles.
Amaze puzzles? No, I did say maze puzzle. Unfortunately, that was not a stroke of brilliance on my part. We do say a lot, don't we? Anyway, it's like 700 of these amaze puzzles in this really beautiful rendered like island and that looks like something out of Myst, only on modern day hardware, which is actually I think what the creator Jonathan Blow was going for.
Mm-hmm.
And you solve these puzzles, and they're not just like drawing a line through a maze. Like they build on themselves, they introduce new concepts and like weird different puzzle aspects, but it's all just innovating on this sort of maze concept. And I haven't quite beat the game yet. I've got about 2 or 3 different levels left to go from what I know about, and there might be like secrets and stuff that unlock after you beat the main game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's the most fun I've had with a video game all year.
Well, okay.
It's February, but still, I don't know. I don't really know what to say about the game, partially because I haven't beat it. But I just figured we were mentioning indie developers.
Yeah, no, I played Myst back when that was a thing.
I've played Myst. I haven't beaten it.
I did not enjoy that at all.
Really?
Well, because the thing about I'm going off of just diluted memory at this point, but what I remember about that game is that there were no instructions. You just kind of dropped into this world and you walk around. And there are a couple of hints as to like, hey, maybe if you arrange these things in certain ways, something will happen. And so I would spend a whole bunch of time trying to solve a particular puzzle, and then I'd realize there's some missing piece that I clearly need to get from somewhere else. And so I'd go searching around for that other piece, and then it'd be like, oh, now you're in a different universe with treetops and jungles. And I can't. And now they throw a whole bunch of other puzzles at me, and I'm like, I can't keep this straight. It was kind of levels of Inception that I just couldn't. And granted, I this is something that was kind of more commonplace when you were doing text-based adventure games, that you would hand draw maps and stuff. You'd have kind of a notepad out, and that does sound like a very fun thing. Myst did not come across as that sort of game where like, oh, I'm going to write down all this stuff so I know. And so I got all sorts of confused playing that game, and then eventually game FAQs started to be a thing, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's that.
And that just ruins it. Like if you even look at like one game FAQ for a puzzle in like The Witness, you might as well just like read the whole thing, and then there's no story to the game. So
that was the thing though, is that for Myst, going through, I mean, it's kind of like when you look at the walkthroughs for Super Mario World. And you're like, oh, I don't actually have to play any of the game. I can just play like 10 levels and then win. Okay. Myst is similar in that there's a way to just kind of win. You go through and you're like, this didn't make sense at all. I was right. This doesn't actually make any sense. This is just, if you happen to click all of the right buttons, then you win the game.
I mean, isn't that true of anything? I remember there was a legal argument. Someone figured out there was this exploit in a casino for a particular slot machine. Mm-hmm. And so there was a sequence of buttons you could press and it would like guarantee a payout. The casino obviously sued, but the guy won using the legal defense. I pressed the sequence of buttons I was legally entitled to press.
Yeah.
There was no time I hit a button I wasn't legally allowed to press.
Right. I
So
mean,
it's
the casino should sue their QA team.
Yeah, exactly. But so, like, that's all video games are. You're just pressing a sequence of buttons.
But most video games, you get some sort of feedback as to how that is going. Myst, I would describe as, I think the Richard Feynman talks about cracking bank vaults, the kind of the personal vaults, but not bank vaults. But he'd discover all of these little clues that, like, okay, you'd actually feel less resistance once you got the first numbers, so you could eventually set this stuff in. I would describe Myst as trying to unlock a 20 sequence turn rotating lock with no clues as to tumble lock with no clues as to how that's going.
Yeah, you definitely get a lot more feedback in The Witness because, like, there's very obviously, like, lit up panels where you have puzzles that you can solve. Even though you might not know everything, like, you don't need pieces. It's not a point and click thing where you get things. You could reason about how the puzzle might work without having learned about necessarily the mechanics of it from somewhere else on the other side of the island. And, like, when you solve it, it, like, lights up and is very obvious when you're done. Right. And if you haven't drawn a line through the maze, then you're not done with the puzzle, right? Like, it is pretty good at telegraphing your progress through the individual puzzles, not necessarily through the whole game, although there are some important markers for that. But yeah, have you ever played Zork?
I have played Zork.
Yeah, that's the only text-based adventure I've ever played.
That's the seminal. I mean, that's the big one.
Yeah, but you absolutely have to get, like, a pen and paper out and draw what you do. Like,
yeah,
unless you have a phenomenal, like, visual memory, you can't, like.
Right. So the idea is that with these text adventure games, this used to be how exciting video games were. Is that you would be presented with this console. It would say, you are standing in a room. You can go north. You can go south. You can go east. What do you want to do? And you type in go north. And it would go, now you're in a different room. And you could pick up items and keep items in your inventory. And you'd have health and things like that. But the entire mechanism for determining where you were in the game was simply by reading those descriptions. And so if you went south after going north, you'd end up back where you started, etc. Zork was kind of the big example of I don't want to say it was the first, it was certainly the most successful, I think, of the text adventure games.
Remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely has the biggest legacy.
It does have some AI, which is which is why writing everything down in Zork doesn't entirely work. Because there are a few characters that operate every turn in a non-deterministic way.
Oh, right, yeah. I was thinking there are, like, some mazes and stuff that I don't know if I'd be able to get through if I wasn't writing things down. So,
well, I mean, and then and it becomes eventually like like Ocarina of Time, right? When you're running through the forest.
Oh yeah,
you have to follow this pattern, and there's some where that's one where it's very difficult to make a map.
Kevin, you've just totally. I can't think of the name. The Forbidden Forest. The Lost Woods.
Lost Woods.
The Lost Woods. That's the name. I've just spent the last, like, 20 seconds freaking out because I couldn't remember the name Lost Woods.
Oh man.
Yes. So the Lost Woods. I mean, it didn't start in Ocarina of Time, although I think it was where it introduced the pattern. No. In A Link to the Past. So in A Link to the Past,
yes.
Lost Woods also did scramble you around. It wasn't as bad. I think it was worse in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. It never crossed my mind that you'd played Ocarina of Time.
Of course, I've played Ocarina of Time. I am not. So I don't consider myself a gamer at all, but I've played a lot of like.
Yeah.
I think now we have kind of this big idea of classifying that there's gamers and then there's other people.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, of course, a lot of my childhood was playing Smash Brothers and etc. Well, that's just what everybody did at my age at that time.
I spent many hours playing Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time, actually.
I really enjoyed Majora's Mask. A lot of people do not like that game.
Really?
Yeah.
Like who?
It's generally not particularly well regarded.
I see a
in that
lot of the people.
the difficulty curve. People are frustrated with the difficulty curve. They're frustrated with them just repurposing assets from Ocarina of Time. Yeah, they don't like that whole. You're just you've only got 3 days worth of content.
I mean, you repeat that same 3 days over and over and over and
exactly.
over and over.
It is the Groundhog Day of of the Zelda franchise.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, you could just repeat the same one day over and over. I don't know if you could beat the game if you did that, but if you played really quickly. You're a speedrunner may be able to do it in one day.
Speaking also of indie games that have just come out, you know what has just come out, Alex?
I heard a terrible version of the new Euro Truck, except America Truck.
It is America Truck Simulator.
Yeah,
yes.
I heard it wasn't very good.
I have mixed feelings about it.
Okay.
Like right now the map is small, which is...
Yeah, it's just California and Nevada,
It's
right?
California and Nevada, which I'm like, why? I guess maybe... it's certainly different from Europe as far as terrain and stuff goes. I'd love to just drive cross-country in a truck. That sounds like fun. But that's
so what happens if you drive to the edge of Nevada? Do you just fall off into the void?
No, so they've got, and this is true in Euro Truck as well, is that, obviously they have some sort of boundaries to their maps, and so they have to indicate that somehow. So they'll have these little indicators that, you can't go further on this road. That, there'll be an exit ramp that's just, blocked off. You just can't do that. And so you can't do off-road travel in either of these games. So basically that's what that's how they delineate the edge of California and Nevada.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed that's different from Euro Truck Simulator though is that with Euro Truck I think it was like a 6-to-1 ratio, that because obviously if you're driving across all of Europe that's going to take many days.
Yeah.
They don't want you to have to sit there for many days, so they scale everything down. They also don't want to model the entire map of Europe.
Fine.
If you drive from London to Birmingham, you are not driving the 4 hours. You're driving something like 6 minutes.
Oh, wow. That's a big scale back.
Well, I don't remember what the ratio is. It's not.
Oh.
But I mean, it is a pretty heavy scale back.
Okay.
What I've noticed in America Truck Simulator is that, and so they have the time, the in-game time scaled also.
You're right, yeah.
So that if you're traveling at 65 miles an hour, then then that clock is going to move faster. What I've noticed though is that the clock speed changes based on how fast you're going.
Really?
It's very weird. That basically, if I'm driving around, if I'm driving on a highway. In America Truck Simulator, basically every second is a minute of in-game time.
Huh.
If I'm driving around in the city, driving 30 miles an hour, going to make the delivery, it's roughly every 4 to 6 seconds.
Huh.
Which just confuses the heck out of me. But what I think it does is it artificially compresses down the distances, because an 8-hour trip is 6 minutes. In America Truck Simulator, it would have been 25 minutes in Euro Truck Simulator.
No, that is interesting. Yeah. So you don't want to use your in-game radio to play anything then, because it'll just keep distorting the tracks and speeding up the music and slowing it down.
Yeah, that's the thing is I don't know that I like the idea. I mean, because the whole point of at least from my perspective, the enjoyable part of the Truck Simulator game is that you're just driving and you're not paying a lot of attention. You're just driving in a straight line for a long period of time, and you can zone out and listen to audiobooks or podcasts or whatever. What I think they've done with America Truck Simulator is they've actually tried to compress highway time.
So you spend more time stuck in traffic. That's what it sounds like would happen. Because if it's based on speed, so it makes the traffic times much worse. Because when you're stuck in traffic not moving, the in-game time is going to run a lot slower, right?
Yes.
Okay, that doesn't sound like a good feature.
Yeah, it's not. I never noticed anything like that with Euro Truck Simulator. That basically, a minute of in-game time is 7 seconds of out-of-game time. Period. It seems to be just kind of flat. And so, if you're driving and you're mostly on the highway, then you're spending a lot of time on the highway, and it's nice and relaxing, especially at night and stuff. You've got your high beams on, you're just going down the road and excited listening to stuff. But now it's basically you're navigating around all these stoplights and stuff. You get on the highway, you're like, all right, good. Now I just get to drive And you're like, oh, nope, I'm there now.
Do you know if that's a setting you can turn off?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I mean, there's a lot of mods for the game, right? So
there are, yeah.
you can
So it could be
imagine
that'll be a tweakable thing at some point.
I don't know. I've never played the games. They've never necessarily made sense for me to play.
Oh, they don't make sense to even the people who like them. Like, we can't explain why these are amazing, but they are.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. I just can't wait for the version that A, either lets you drive around on Mars using this new NASA data.
There we go.
Or B, that Google gets along with and you can just drive around in real space on Google Maps.
That would be interesting.
You'd have to, like, somehow delete all the cars from the images.
Right, but that's doable. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think the blocker there is just that Google Maps is too low resolution for gaming expectations.
Maybe.
Realism aside.
I'd play it.
Well, I mean, I think you can do, if you get Google Earth, you can just have it drive along a route. Like, not drive, but,
Yeah, simulator route. Yeah.
simulate.
You can also fly an airplane through it. If you want.
Yeah, that's right.
For some weird reason, it has a flight sim built into it.
This is what happens when you give your employees 20% time, Google. This is what happens.
You can fly on the moon, too, actually, because the moon is on Google Earth.
Really?
Yeah, and so you can have your flight sim on the moon, even though it uses Earth physics.
Oh, that is... Oh, okay.
Obviously, because an airplane wouldn't work in the zero atmosphere of the moon.
Right, but the gravity doesn't change? That would be very challenging.
I don't think the gravity changes either.
Landing on the... Ooh, yeah, that'd be rough.
Literally.
Speaking of the moon...
NASA is building a giant space flashlight to shine at the moon, and they're going to launch it in 2018 when they launch the Orion orbiter into a test orbit of the moon. The SLS, the Space Launch System, is launching a test mission in 2018, and that's the next big NASA rocket. It's going to carry us to the moon and to Mars and beyond, as NASA likes to say. And as part of that test mission, they have, like, what I understand to be like a docking ring, or so between like a couple different stages. And when they blow this docking ring, there's some extra space in there that they're going to fit like a bunch of CubeSats, basically. And one of the satellites they're building is a big laser flashlight so that they can shine it at the moon and understand how the moon is laid out. So, it's like a laser rangefinder that they're just going to orbit around the moon and shine at the moon and understand how the surface is mapped out, the geography of it.
Yeah, so not really a flashlight, though. Like, really what we're talking about is a bounce board.
A bounce board?
Yeah, like with film. You just throw up a reflector to reflect the light, as they're giving the moon some fill light.
Yeah, basically. It's going to reflect 50 kilowatts of sunlight down onto the surface of the moon.
Is that a lot of kilowatts?
I mean, it's more than zero.
All right.
Which it's a big solar sail that they're going to use to basically light up the poles so they can look at them because the poles are dark
and probably are the most water plentiful.
I mean, in theory, we seem to see that a lot of poles on other things have a lot of ice and a lot of water. On Mars, on Earth. I don't know why
there's less friction,
There's less friction? Between what?
Because if you're spinning, then you're friction, and the poles are not moving very fast, so,
Yeah, the solar wind. But the solar wind is more concentrated there because there's a gap in the magnetic field, at least on Earth.
Right.
That's why you have the Aurora Borealis, because
But the poles never encounter direct sunlight. Because the moon is oriented, its spin is right. It's because there's some where the axial tilt is not aligned with the plane. Because I think like Neptune, I think is almost 90 degrees off of.
Oh yeah, Neptune's crazy.
Yeah,
Neptune is a really weird planet.
But I think the moon is mostly aligned, which is why you'd see poles that are.
It's also so weird for me that it's tidally locked. Like, how did it wind up being tidally locked? Like, why do we only ever see one side of it?
That's weird.
Because, like, in a few thousand years, it won't be the case because it'll farther away and slowing down and stuff. And a few thousand years ago, it wasn't. So how did we wind up alive at the time when we are? I don't know. That's weird.
When two people love each other very much.
Yeah, uh-huh.
They buy a telescope and they look at the moon and it doesn't change.
It's a very romantic
That's
thing
how
to
things
do.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very romantic thing to do. It's a big pizza pie in the sky. Isn't that how the song goes?
I think so. Sure. Yeah, actually that's where that song comes from.
The moon.
Exactly.
It's an ancient Moonian song that got carried down to Earth somehow. Fell down. It was on a tablet. So here's a question. I saw Michael Aranda ask this on Twitter the other day. Is listening to audiobooks actually reading? Is that the right terminology?
It's a semantics argument.
It is. And?
I don't know. Like, it's up to you to decide, dear speaker/listener.
Let us know in an iTunes review.
I guess there are two questions. One is, are they semantically equivalent? Well, no, they're not semantically equivalent. Mm-hmm. But is there an implication that one is worse than the other?
Oh no, not at all.
Because there used to be a bit of a stigma, I think, about that. I mean, I was sort of embarrassed for a long time to admit that I listen to audiobooks a lot because it felt like it's an admission that I don't have the focus to sit down and actually read.
I never picked up on that if there was a stigma.
I think this may have been like before things like Audible started to make things more accessible, that it was basically books on tape were the things that you bought for old people who can't see.
I remember as a kid listening to a lot of books on tape, even though I could read. Mm-hmm. They were at the library. Why not?
Yeah, no, kids would and older people would. Proper
adults aren't allowed to have fun.
Right, proper adults read books.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's dumb.
I could be wrong about that. That was just the impression that I got at the time. I don't hold with that. So, but I don't know that.
Anyway, so you've been reading a lot of books.
I have been reading
with your ears
a lot of books. And I read one book that I really wanted to like. I read this book as a nonfiction book, which is always risky.
Yeah.
And I wanted this to be good, and it just wasn't. So this book is Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle.
Okay.
She is, I believe, a sociologist with MIT.
So she probably has some credentials.
Yes. The premise of her book is that to show how to both summarize and show my reaction to this book, the gist is technology is bad and we can't talk to each other anymore. We should stop using technology and talk to each other anymore.
Okay.
That
all right.
That's the summary.
So I disagree with the proposition, but what's her logic? Well, so the logic is the interesting bit there.
Right. So she starts off by basically making the case, and she cites some examples where measurements of empathy between college and younger people are markedly declined. And her concern is that we replace in-person interaction with digital interaction, and that it doesn't in fact serve the same needs. And that it becomes very easy for us to act in non-empathetic ways, and we end up in a position where we are afraid to make or take phone calls. We're afraid to have conversations in public. We become very uncomfortable with silences or lulls in conversation, and that the availability of our phones provides an easy answer to boredom.
Okay.
Which I agree with all those things.
Yeah. Where's the... Yeah.
And this is part of the thing, is that she talks about that, and then she just sort of makes the case that so clearly we need to stop. Some people have proposed that we need to provide technical solutions to these problems, but the idea of using technology to solve technology is obviously ridiculous, and therefore just stop using your phones. Again, I'm being hostile toward the book just because I was irritated with it, because I think it brings up important points. I was like, this is great. Yes, let's discuss these things. And then, I want to hear what your good suggestions are for how we move forward in this world of digital technology to providing a better environment. And she's like, we should move backward. I was like, because...
Just throw out the last 50 years.
Right. Well, and so I think this is perfectly fair to try and make the argument that I don't know that I could make this argument, but I think it'd be fine to say Facebook is ultimately a bad thing for our psyches. We should stop using Facebook. But I think to say that because one aspect of the digital environment has changed, that we should kind of, I think it's too much to say, let's get rid of our phones. Because I think that ignores that our phones, that she makes the argument, and I think pretty convincingly, that our phones are a poor substitute for social interaction, and that they cause harm to our in-person interactions. But the idea of saying because of this we should stop using our phones, I think ignores the fact that we use our phones for a lot of other benefits that have nothing to do with social interaction. And so you need to try and figure out some way to either we should say even if you just argued we should disable the ability to use social media or texts on phones, like, which would be a ridiculous argument to make, but like that at least would kind of fit what her argument was. And like you're addressing a particular thing that technology does and saying that it does it poorly, and then trying to throw out the technology, which
Well, I think the biggest argument is how it harms in-person interactions, and that's not limited to just texting and stuff. Like people browsing the web and doing all these other things that your phone can do in social situations, I think does actively harm those social situations. So her argument may not necessarily be that it's texting that is ruining everything. It's that it's having these always on connected devices that we can do anything we want with them with us at all times means that we may not always choose to be socially active people in certain situations. I agree to somewhat extent that, and even like you are being a social person, just not with people that you're physically near. I do that on occasions. Like I'll be on Twitter and I'll talk to people and like, oops, I'm standing next to someone who I could probably have who I could probably have a very reasonable and nice conversation with, but I don't.
Right. Because
I'm on Twitter, or I'm on Twitter at lunch, sitting at a cafeteria table with some people that I know, and not necessarily that I know really well, but that I could be very easily friends with if I talked to them instead of just like talking on Twitter. And I think those cases are where having your phone with you and actively connected to a very easy to get form of social interaction, right? So I think the cost of entry to interact with people on Twitter is very, very, very low.
Right.
The cost of interaction to turn to someone sitting next to you is, while not very high, higher.
Right.
Right. And I do see that as an issue, I think.
Well, so it's that, but then there's also the issue of, so if we just said, don't ever use your phones in public, like if we just all adopted that strategy, that would fix that problem. But the other concern, which I think she makes, which I think I agree with, is that we're also at a point where we are afraid to be alone and afraid to be bored and afraid to be isolated with our own thoughts. And so we will gravitate toward these devices even in situations where we would otherwise just be thinking quietly to ourselves, just because we're not comfortable with that. And there's a study that she cites that I also will also be in the show notes, where basically a bunch of academics invited a whole bunch of people into a room and they said, you're going to sit here quietly with nothing to do for 15 minutes. Do you think that you would decide during that time to give yourself a very painful electric shock? What would you think, Alex? That's what they asked these participants.
I would not give myself an electric shock.
Really?
I am fairly certain. Yeah, I often sit in a room.
So was everybody else, but a very significant portion of them gave themselves electric shocks while sitting in a room just to relieve the boredom. Because it was less painful to just take the shock than to be scared and alone with their own thoughts.
See, this is one of the studies that I want to go participate in, because I can't agree with that. Like, no, I wouldn't do that. Like, right. I often, and granted, I will often put music on, but I will go to bed sometimes like 2 hours early, just so I can like think about things.
Mm-hmm. The thing though is that yes, I also feel the same way. There's no way that would be true for me. But I look at like the participants also said, "What are you talking? Are you crazy?" I'm going to intentionally
which is why I want to be involved in this study.
Well, you can conduct the study for yourself.
I'll get a 9-volt battery, and I'll sit in a chair for 15 minutes. And if I don't stick the 9-volt battery to my tongue, then
you don't have to actually do that. I mean, you could just sit in a room with no kind of visual stimulation, no tiles or count or whatever, for 15 minutes, and then just write down, what were your feelings about that experience. So you could write down your own thoughts on, what your experience was. I mean, I would imagine that I would probably sit and just try and meditate for 15 minutes and then be fine. But I will say, like, I think about, on the one hand, I think, yeah, that's ridiculous. Boredom is perfectly fine. But then I remember what airplanes were like before you could have your when all electronics had to be turned off and you'd be on the runway for 40 minutes, and how disconnected and isolating that felt, which is like, it's an embarrassing thing to admit that it affected me at all.
I have a more overwhelming problem sitting on the runway. The only time I get stressed out in air travel and such is not like going through security, it's not waiting for the plane. Mm-hmm. It's when we're not doing anything.
Right.
We should have left 15 minutes ago. Why haven't we left?
Yep.
We're just sitting here doing nothing. Mm-hmm. That just bothers the heck out of me.
And you can't turn on your phone to check the latest ETA and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, even now when I can have my phone on, there's nothing to tell me why, like, what the new ETA is. It's just, we're not moving for no good reason.
Right.
Let's move, please.
But the point is, we could conduct this experiment for ourselves and try and see, okay, yeah, I sat and did nothing for 15 minutes. What was that like? For a lot of people, apparently it's a very miserable thing. And the author of this book really kind of puts the blame on the internet and our cellular devices for developing in us a fear of being alone with our own thoughts.
Yeah.
And I do find that that's true that I don't know that I would characterize it as a fear in my own case, but I do find myself constantly flitting back and forth between various activities. Like if I'm taking a break from something that I'm working on, I'll very often be scrolling through Twitter. That it's not I'm
on Twitter all the time.
It's not that you ever stop doing a thing, you just downgrade the level of intensity of the thing that you're doing. There have been days where I wake up and it's literally like I wake up and I look at my phone. Then I go, all right, now I've got to ramp up and start doing work. I'll move over to the computer and I'll be working on the computer. And then I'll, go to the bathroom. I'll make food. I'll do whatever. I'll start playing the piano, whatever. But there's never a gap between any of those things. Like it's always just ramping up different intensities of tasks.
Yeah, I mean, would you consider like watching YouTube or a TV show like a task? Where would you classify that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the thing is, and I think she makes the same sort of argument that casually browsing Reddit is not downtime.
Well, I think that that's an active thing you can do. Like if I put on a YouTube playlist of things I haven't watched yet and just sit and do nothing but just stare at the screen, how like really active is that?
It is though, because it is something for your brain to engage in. If you deprive yourself of sensory information, then you do have to just think. And so when you mentioned putting on music, I'd say, well, then that doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's lyricless music?
Yeah, it's still something for your brain to feed on during that time.
The reason I do that more is, I'll let you in a secret. When I was in middle school and elementary school, I hated music. Like, I would demand, like, people would turn the cars, like, what I eventually figured out was that if I used music, and I went very slowly. I listened to just exclusively like piano and like violin stuff for a couple of years, and then I slowly have built up a music repertoire that I actually enjoy, because I learned that it helps me concentrate so much. Like it makes following like a single like thought line really easily, like for me to do. I kind of found like the utility in music rather than I think the beauty of it, I guess. I don't know. And then I started playing the piano and like I spent 5 years doing that. I still don't know if I see like music and such as a art or as a utility. Is it entertainment, or is it just a thing I do because it's useful to help me keep a single thought?
I'll be honest, I do not listen to much music at all.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare that I will listen to anything.
Okay.
I play music a lot of the time, but for me, music is very much like sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, this can be enjoyable to do, but it's not super enjoyable to observe. It's not to say that I dislike when I do listen to music, but it's not so great an experience that I find myself doing it very often. It is very, very cathartic for me to sit down and just play a few tunes on the piano. It would not be enjoyable for me to record it and listen to it back. It's even less enjoyable for me to listen to. I shouldn't say less, but it's equally less enjoyable for me to listen to other music. Which is just, I think we probably just have different relationships with music than most people.
The other thing I think I finally narrowed down about what I really didn't like about music for a long time is I really don't like words. So if I can hear like what people are saying,
Alex, we're on a podcast right now.
I know.
This is the most wordy of music.
Yes, I agree. But if I can hear something, and I realize this, like lying awake in bed at night, is that if I can hear like someone, like the neighbors or someone has the TV up too loud, and I can make out the words that people are saying,
okay,
I will be drawn to those words, and I will have to keep listening to what people are saying.
Yep.
Whereas if the TV is just a few notches lower, then it's just background noise and whatever. Mm-hmm. And so when there's like a new song, if it's a song I haven't heard like more than 10 or 20 times, just on in the background, I will just be totally distracted by it. I will have to listen to it, and I will have to try to understand what they're saying. And so it just totally like overrides my own train of thought. The weird thing is that if I listen to the same song for like 10 to 20 times, then that goes away, and I find it much easier to just zone out and think of my own things.
I have. It's funny because I'm almost exactly the opposite in that when I used to listen to music, I would listen almost exclusively to like a Pandora station of just comedy musicians. Huh. Because for me, like the lyrics were the actual enjoyable part that I could appreciate. Yeah. That the music, I'm like, this is just. It's just sound waves, but then like lyrics, like this is just like listening to poetry with a music bed underneath it. And comedy and Broadway tunes tend to be the two genres that very heavily emphasize lyrics.
Yeah, Broadway stuff tells like a story, especially if you listen to like the whole album.
Right.
Like, yeah, I mean, I have a couple of comedy stuff like Weird Al. I think Weird Al mostly he struck the right musical notes for me. And so it got stuck in my head, and then I kind of had to listen to it, and then it was funny at the same time. I mean, I think I have a very weird relationship with music. Like, I literally can't listen to the radio because it'll just be new song after new song after new song, and it just is so distracting.
Oh yeah, I mean this is why oldies stations are the best of radio. Like, is that at least this now becomes a participatory medium.
What is on an oldies station?
Well, I don't know anymore. I haven't had a radio in years. But at the time,
what
it was
were
like,
you thinking
they're never playing new songs. They're playing songs that you've already heard and you can sing along to. Now it's again just I'm participating in creating music, not just passively observing music. It's the same way with sports for me. And I don't, obviously I don't begrudge people for whom music is their life or for whom sports is their life. But I would much rather play a game of Ultimate Frisbee and sit down and buy a big TV and invite my friends over to watch some other people play Ultimate Frisbee. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Next time in New York, we're going to play Ultimate Frisbee in Central Park, okay?
Just the two of us.
Yeah, why not? 1v1.
Well, because you can't move while you have the Frisbee. That is one of the rules of Ultimate Frisbee.
So?
I predict it will be a tie.
I predict that one of us will eventually get a score on the goal, however improbable it will be. Just sort of the infinite monkeys principle.
But anyway, so I was thinking about this book, and I was irritated by the conclusions, because I think there is a discussion to be had about how do we make technology more how do we make technology better equipped to not take advantage of our human idiosyncrasies, but rather work with them to produce a better environment? Because right now we basically leverage every trick that we know from behavioral economics to encourage people to come back to apps and to continue to interact, and to continue to share, and that sort of thing. And
yeah, I think you have to move away from the advertising model, because once you move away from the advertising model, then there's no incentive for companies to employ those marketing tricks.
There's still very much an incentive of just keeping your attention. It's just a market share thing at that point. That if I keep you on Facebook, you're less likely to go over to Twitter, and so you're more likely to subscribe to my thing. I mean, you see that Netflix and Spotify are not, well, Spotify is partially, but like Netflix is not an advertising based model, but they're still employing techniques to keep you watching.
Yeah, like the autoplay.
Like if there was if there was no reason, if removing advertisements fixed the problem, you'd see Netflix going like, "Hey, oh, you're here. Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could watch." We're not seeing subscription based technologies work like gyms, where the whole goal is let's get your money and then please don't ever show up.
Yeah, like, that was the exact
ideally,
example.
That's what Netflix would do, right? Is that please pay your monthly subscription and then please never watch anything at all. Like, we want to do just barely enough. That's not what they do, because they're competing for your attention.
From all the other subscription-based services that are now popping up, which is a whole other topic unto itself. Or
advertising services.
Yeah.
But so I did actually tweet out, I surveyed people. I wanted to know how they felt that their phone impacted their life.
I voted.
Did you?
I did.
So far we have 585 votes,
which is a lot.
That's a lot of votes. 63% of people feel that their phone makes their life better.
Yeah.
27% of people said there was no real change, positive or negative. And 10% said that it makes their life worse.
So I am part of the 63%.
Okay.
We are the 63%.
I'm pretty sure on the whole I'm in the 10%.
That you think it's worse?
Overall, like from the weighing all of the factors, I think that it is.
So why did you spend hundreds of dollars recently to make your life worse?
That's a good point. But I'm not ready to just not have a phone, and I was using 2 devices and now I'm using 1. So
okay. You still just spent hundreds of dollars to make your life worse. It seems like a counterproductive behavior.
No, it wasn't to make my life worse. It was to make a device which makes it was to improve, but marginally. It was to improve a negative value. It was to go from -10 to -8.
Yeah, but wouldn't the better move have been to throw out all 3 devices and not spend the money?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, but I'm not going to do that.
Just buy a fold-out map, so that way you can navigate without your phone, and then a cheap Sansa MP3 player to play your audiobooks. There you go.
Yeah, maybe.
Kevin is stuck in the 1980s. He's a fold-out map and a Walkman.
It did get me thinking, though, also, and this is something that I think about every time that I edit these podcasts. Is just
Can we say a lot?
Well, that too, yes. So, one, we say a lot, and not just we throw in billions upon billions of qualifying statements. So, it was, yeah, I mean that, I think that, oh, yeah, totally. So, like, there's so much of just that basically I could trim off the first half of anything that either of us said, and the thing would totally work just fine. And a lot of times I do.
Yeah.
But sometimes I don't.
And conversation flows a lot better.
Well, and it makes me wonder, though, how much of we have... Because in the book, she brought up this idea that we have this fear that we just don't know how to have conversations anymore. And that the idea of lulls does... that if you're out with your friends and there's a lull in conversation, we can't handle it, we pull out the phone. And I do wonder that to what extent that attitude kind of pervades here, and I feel compelled to say, or to draw out the end of pauses while I think of the next thing to say. Alex is looking at his phone. God damn it,
what?
Alex. All right, somebody text Alex so we can continue the podcast.
Wait, what? I'm back.
Or just leave him an iTunes review. He'll love that. He'll see it. He'll get a notification.
I will. I haven't actually checked in like 2 weeks.
But it does make me wonder if we're just uncomfortable with, because what's interesting when I edit these podcasts is that there's very rarely big chunks of silence.
Yeah,
but
I think that's by design. Well, at least I try to minimize silence.
But we don't minimize silence by talking. We minimize silence by just filling or umming or stretching out things.
The words out. Yeah, I mean,
now I'm going to have a really hard time editing this because I need to persist enough of it to convey.
Yeah. I could try to just keep talking. I mean, I would try to just keep speaking in a way that wasn't filled with the ums and ahs and such, but I'm not sure that would even be better. So maybe it'd be better off if we had pauses and lulls in the conversation, because I guess without the ums and the ahs and the pauses, how would you know?
See, this
really?
I actually thought about, like, how could we actually do this? Because I was looking, I was Googling around, I was like, how do you train yourself to stop using vocal tics?
Can you?
Well, I mean, people will train to. People that want to be good at public speaking, they'll work on these sort of things. One of the suggestions is ask your friend to literally call you out anytime you say which is
you said Now we're in an infinite loop if you keep this up.
Exactly. But as I was thinking, if we... now I'm catching every single time that there's this pause. I was thinking, maybe we should have a buzzer on the show, and there's no way that that won't get irritating before more than 2 minutes into the podcast. It will just be buzzing each other all of the time.
You'd have to automate like the removal of the buzzer from the podcast editing.
Oh, well, that's the thing. I could have it set to a specific tone.
Right.
And then just remove. Yeah, there we go.
Or have it be like dogs. So, like, only include the frequencies that don't have that tone from the podcast. So it's still there, but it's just not in the published version because no one can hear it.
Right.
It just didn't get recorded. That would be great. Or we could each buy a dog and have the dog next to us and then have dog whistles. So that way the dog will bark when it hears the whistle, but the whistle wouldn't really make it into the podcast.
Yeah.
Except then the dog barking terrible. Would be in the podcast. Are you allowed to have a dog in your apartment?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, there we go. Problem solved.
It makes me wonder, though. I think about conversations that I had with my parents when I was a teen, because I remember at one point, this was before we had smartphones. I think I had a phone, but I didn't have a smartphone, certainly. And so at some point, I was in the conversation and I was bored. I was being lectured about something and I was sort of tuning out. And the thought occurred to me that I was listening to my dad talk. My dad's a wonderful guy, so this is a Kevin was a snotty teenager story, not a my dad Jones on and on story. But I remember sitting there and going, he has just continued to talk for 20 minutes without significant pauses, without without having to stretch out things to, figure out what he wants to say. And I'm going, how does somebody... This is an incredible skill. I wish that I could do this. I can't speak in complete paragraphs. I speak in these hyphenated, chopped up things where I tack on the ends of clauses and there are these implicit ellipses in everything that I say, and then all of those filler words. And I wonder, can some of that be credited to just our adjusted ability to have in-person conversations? Because we're very used to just speaking in very small snippets across most of our internet platforms.
Maybe. But I'm going to say a couple of things. First off, I think if I was in like a speech mode, so like if you were in front of people or you were talking to your son and you were trying to tell him a very specific thing and you were trying to impugn upon him this sort of like moral or this explanation or something.
Just for the record, it was a conversation with the tone of roughly this.
Right.
So, but you and I don't have the ability to do that. We don't have the ability to just speak extemporaneously in a low-key environment like this. Like, certainly, yes, if you're getting up and giving a TED Talk, you're going to have that thing memorized. You're going to probably be fine. You may have to, go to a trainer for a day or two, but you're going to get that down.
Have you ever done an improvised public speech?
Yeah, like not in a formal environment, but I've had to give off the cuff speeches to groups of people.
But not off the cuff, but not pre-written.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, because I remember in high school, I used to, we were supposed to pre-write something and then present it. I didn't. I just was like, I'll make something up as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. I think it was partly just like the setting and the atmosphere made it easier to talk without saying because I think it was very much a case where if you couldn't say more than twice, or you'd like lose points from your public, because it was a public speaking lesson, right?
That's the thing. That seems like the worst possible way to help people who have a problem with saying is to actively penalize them for it. To call it out every time, like for the teacher to make some obnoxious sound every time they do that, fine, you're Pavlov training them, but to actually penalize them seems punitive.
Well, I mean, you were supposed to have these things written like beforehand, so you're not coming up with it off the top of your head. You weren't supposed to. So I used to go up there, and I remember that I never lost points for saying and I was just making things up off the top of my head. And speaking about how NASA is the finest center for grain development in the secondary solar system, and that we have millions and millions of more grain-powered rockets than anywhere else in the known universe. Like, just stupid stuff like that. I don't know. I feel like we should try to do that now. Just have like 10 minutes each to try to speak without saying
Well, it's not just though. Like what I've noticed, I guess I'm sensitive to this because I edit a lot of this. And it's also now a question of, should I edit a lot of it? Maybe some of it is human. There's a degree to which you can over edit things to the point that everybody just sounds robotic and stiff.
Yeah.
So it's always a question of, like, I don't know how much to track out of this. What you and I both do is there's the false start. We both do that a lot.
Yeah.
We both
absolutely.
we both do that a lot. There's like is a big one. Like is a really big one.
Like when?
But there are those just sort of prefixes.
Well, I think part of that is because...
Okay, no, stop. Well, I think part of that is that entire thing could be cut right there. It has nothing at all. There's no reason to say it. It means nothing.
What it means is that we are trying to talk with a little bit of delay between us across and have a civil conversation. So by me saying that towards the end of what you're saying signals you that, hey, I have something I want to say. That's what saying that does. So I don't just come out of nowhere just at the tail end of what you're saying.
But I had stopped talking when you started talking.
That's the delay. I blame that on delay. They're like 3,000 miles apart. Light doesn't travel that fast.
But you see, my point though is that this really is like I'm just exemplifying all of these here. I want to be very explicit that I'm not at all calling you out. I'm not calling you out. This is literally just
understand.
Both of us are awful.
I understand.
But I also wouldn't say that either of us are unrepresentative. I think that this would be typical if any people were recording podcasts. I would love to listen to the raw podcasts from people who have not done a ton of podcasts. Presumably people who do podcasts for an extended period of time get to the point where they will speak with very few vocal tics for 20 minutes at a time. And then they're good, or they'll go back and they'll catch themselves when they stop in the middle of something and go, oh, I screwed that up, I'm going to go back, and then just start the sentence over and do things cleanly.
I'm trying to prevent the symptom of thinking that everyone in the past was better than it is now. I
Right.
hate that. I
Yep.
hate that. Like, maybe people in the past spoke better. Like, because you have this false memory that, like, I said, like. So you have this false memory that everything in the past was super awesome and that now politicians have somehow ruined everything and the future generations are going to be terrible. I hate that.
Yep.
I hate when people talk like that. So I'm just worried that you saying, like, my father could go on for hours without ever saying or pausing or anything
Right.
is just.
But my father's
one of
still
those
alive.
things.
This isn't a good old days fallacy.
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
I mean, I agree with you that is.
We should have your dad on the podcast, then. That's what we should do. We'll have him on the podcast and see how the speech patterns align with our own.
There wouldn't be likes. I tell you that we both use like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a cultural thing from
Yep.
growing up in the time period that we did.
Mm-hmm. But I don't
It's
know.
wicked cool. Maybe I'll say wicked instead of like.
You should say wicked much more often. That'd be enjoyable.
Okay. I'll try to say it
I'll
wicked
try and
often.
extend my O's. Be a little more Midwestern.
Okay. That'd be wicked cool.
Oh, we got a podcast. Okay.
What area does that even sound like it's from?
It's mostly the Midwestern parody of Fargo.
Okay. I guess I can see that.
Yeah.
Let's go to North Dakota. Let's have a podcast live from North Dakota.
North Dakota? Yeah, no.
I have a friend who's in North Dakota right now.
A lot of people are
Going to
because
university.
the corporate tax something is favorable, so there's a lot of stuff in Fargo.
There's also a lot of stuff in one building in Delaware. Like, that's where Apple and
Yes.
Microsoft and all the other companies, they're all incorporated in one building in Delaware because
Yep.
it's super cheap.
No, it's not because it's super cheap. It's because when you bring a case against a corporation,
Mhm.
you bring it under the state in which they are registered.
Ah, okay.
Delaware has a large body of case law that is very, very favorable to corporations.
Okay.
So everybody's incorporated in Delaware. I mean, really just about every large company is actually incorporated in Delaware, even though that's not where they primarily do business.
Yeah. I
It's
mean, I
because
don't know.
it's a
Maybe
liability
Microsoft
thing.
sells most of their Windows phones in Delaware.
It
Like
is
all seven
entirely
of them.
possible.
Sorry, Windows Phone.
But yeah, so we say I'm a lot. I said, but yeah, we've got ellipses in our things. I do wonder, obviously, it's not just a matter of calling ourselves out, because everybody has their own vocal tics, and everybody always has had vocal tics. And it's not fair to just say, well, clearly nobody 50 years ago had any of these issues.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if there is an extent to which the fact, I mean, it's certainly true for me. I have fewer conversations in person than I would have if there were no internet. I think I'm comfortable saying that definitively.
Yeah. No, I'd agree.
And so
I
does
would've
that
said
lack
yeah.
of practice make real conversations more challenging just because we don't have the same amount of experience with them?
Maybe. But I'd be very worried to learn that. What we really need to do is build a time machine, go back 50 years and just wander around and see if everyone is talking in like perfect English with no pauses and no ellipses and no likes and ands. And I think that would be wicked cool to do.
Well, I mean, that's part of this whole study of lack of empathy amongst youngsters, though.
But space time machines, Kevin.
Well, okay, yes, that would be a more enjoyable way to figure things out.
Yes.
Obviously, then where we go from, if that is true, where we go from having that information is where I really depart from this book's whole attitude.
Yeah, don't go backwards. That's just counterproductive for everyone in the society.
And I'm overcharacterizing it, but really she's very hostile toward technology, and very dismissive of any attempts to try and improve technology. I said, oh my gosh. All right, we're going to have to start the podcast over, everybody.